The vanilla cake box felt heavy in my hands, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. 3 years. We had made it to 3 years. I shifted the box to my left hand, unlocking the apartment door as quietly as I could. I wanted to surprise him. "Liam?" I called out softly, stepping into the dim hallway. Silence answered me. I frowned, walking into the living room. The TV was off. The lights were dimmed. On the coffee table, 2 crystal wine glasses sat side by side. One was half full of the expensive Merlot I had been saving for a special occasion. The other was empty, save for a smudge on the rim. I froze. The smudge was red, bright, violent, familiar red. Ruby Woo, my stomach churned. I knew that shade. I bought it for her birthday last month. "Sarah?" I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. A low, stifled giggle drifted from the bedroom. My bedroom. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the cake. I set the box down on the floor with trembling hands and walked toward the slightly ajar door. I pushed it open. They were tangled in the sheets I had washed 2 days ago. Liam looked up, his eyes widening in panic. Sarah just looked annoyed, like I had interrupted a private meeting. "Elena," Liam scrambled back, pulling the duvet up. "You said you'd be late. You said you had a meeting." "It's our anniversary, Liam," I said. My voice was flat, unrecognizable to my own ears. "Well, you're never here," he shouted, his panic turning instantly into defense. "What did you expect?" "I'm a man, Elena. I have needs. You're always working, always tired. If you were ever home, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere." I stared at him, feeling a dull, suffocating weight pressing on my chest. "I work double shifts to pay your rent, Liam. I work to pay off your car." Sarah sat up, wrapping the sheet around her chest. She looked at me with a pitying expression that felt like a slap across the face. "Oh, Elle," she sighed, tilting her head. "Don't make this awkward. We didn't want you to find out like this. It just happened." "Happened?" I looked at my best friend. "You are in my bed, on my anniversary." "You've been distant," Sarah said, sounding bored. "Liam needed someone who actually appreciates him. You're always so intense. You act like his mother, not his girlfriend." "See?" Liam pointed a finger at me. "She gets it. You're just cold, Elena." I looked between them, the man I loved and the sister I never had. They weren't sorry. They were inconvenienced. "Get out," I whispered. "No," Liam sneered, his confidence returning. "This is my apartment too. If you can't handle the truth, maybe you should leave. Go cool off. We can talk when you stop being dramatic." "Dramatic," I repeated. "I didn't fight. I didn't throw things." I turned around and walked to the closet in the hall. I pulled out my duffel bag and threw my laptop, my charger, and a handful of clothes. I didn't pack the framed photo of us from the mantel. "Elena, stop acting crazy," Liam yelled from the bedroom. "You have nowhere to go. You'll be back in an hour begging me to let you in." I walked to the front door. I took my house key off the ring. It clattered loudly onto the wooden table next to the wine glass with the red lipstick. "Enjoy the rent payments." 3 days later, I sat in the corner of the Onyx Lounge, nursing a watered-down gin and tonic. It was the cheapest thing on the menu, and I still wasn't sure I could afford it. I refreshed my banking app on my phone, $42.18. That was it. That was my life savings after paying off the credit card Liam had maxed out under my name for emergencies. "Pathetic," I muttered, sliding the phone face down. I looked up, scanning the dimly lit room filled with people who smelled like money. That's when I saw him. Julian Sterling. He was sitting in a private booth, bathed in shadow. He looked nothing like Liam. Where Liam was soft and boyish, Julian was sharp angles and ice. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my college tuition. He looked exhausted, rubbing his temples while staring at a tablet. I shouldn't have stood up. I should have walked out. But the anger in my chest was a living thing now, steering my legs toward his booth. "Rough night?" I asked, stopping at the edge of his table. Julian looked up. His eyes were dark, devoid of the warmth Liam faked so well. He didn't smile. "Elena," he said, his voice a low baritone. "My brother's girlfriend, correct?" "Ex," I corrected sharply. "He's sleeping with my best friend, but I assume you don't care about family drama." Julian let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I care about efficiency. And Liam is remarkably inefficient." He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. "Sit." I sat. "Why am I sitting?" "Because you look like you want to kill someone." he said calmly, locking eyes with me. And coincidentally, I need a killer. I'm listening. The board of directors is trying to oust me, Julian said, leaning forward. They say I'm too solitary. Too unstable. They want a family man. They want me married. I blinked, and I don't have time for dating apps, Elena. I need a wife. Someone who knows the family, knows the stakes, and hates my brother as much as I currently do. He took a sip of his scotch. I need a partner. In exchange, I offer you financial security and access. Access to what? To the company, he said, a dangerous glint in his eye. To power. To Liam. My breath hitched. You want me to marry you to save your job? I want a business arrangement, he corrected. 1 year. We play the happy couple. You get half my shares when we divorce. And in the meantime, you get a position at Sterling Corp, a position above Liam. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was insane. It was cold. It was perfect. I want to crush him, I whispered. Then we have a common goal. Suddenly, a young man in a sharp vest appeared at my elbow. Kenji, the assistant. He held out a linen napkin. I realized with a start that a single tear had escaped down my cheek. For the mascara, Ms. Elena, Kenji said softly. It is running. I took the napkin and wiped my face aggressively. The sadness was gone. I'm in, I told Julian. Good, Julian replied, signaling the waiter. Kenji, get her a better drink. We have a wedding to plan. The air in Julian's office was so cold it could preserve meat. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the city that he practically owned. I sat in a leather chair that felt too big for me, staring at the thick document on the mahogany desk. Clause 4, Section B, Mr. Henderson droned on, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The marriage must appear legitimate in all public and private family sectors. This includes shared residency at the Sterling penthouse. I have to live with him? I asked, glancing at Julian. Julian was standing by the window, his back to us. It's a penthouse, Elena. You'll have your own wing. We won't cross paths unless we need to. Clause 7, Henderson continued, ignoring my outburst. Employment. Ms. Elena will be appointed as the head of operations immediately following the nuptials. This grants her executive oversight regarding all mid-level management. Mid-level management, I repeated, the words tasting sweet. That includes the regional sales managers? It includes everyone below the C-suite, Julian said, turning around. Including Liam. I looked down at the paper. It was all there. The money, the house, the job. It was a golden ticket. But my hand hovered over the pen. Was I really going to bind myself to this man? He was a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who saw marriage as a merger. Is there a problem? Julian asked, his voice sharp. If you're having second thoughts, the door is open. I can find someone else. It's not that, I murmured. It's just that's final. My phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a notification. Sarah tagged Liam in a post. I shouldn't have looked. I really shouldn't have. But I tapped the screen. It was a photo of them at Giovanni's, the Italian place I begged Liam to take me to for 2 years. He always said it was too expensive. In the photo, they were holding hands over a plate of truffle pasta. The caption read, "Finally found someone who matches my level. #soulmate, #upgrade, my blood turned to lava." Upgrade? The hesitation evaporated instantly. I didn't care about love. I didn't care about the sanctity of marriage. I cared about erasing that smug smile off Sarah's face. I grabbed the heavy fountain pen. Where I sign? I asked, my voice steady. Mr. Henderson pointed to the bottom line. Here and here. I signed my name with a flourish. The ink was black and permanent. Julian walked over to the desk. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside sat a diamond so large it looked heavy. It was an emerald cut, flawless, and terrifyingly beautiful. Give me your hand, he commanded. I extended my left hand. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. His skin was cool to the touch, his grip firm. It costs more than Liam's life, Julian noted dryly, noticing me staring at it. It's heavy, I whispered. Power usually is, Julian said, releasing my hand. He looked me in the eye, and for a second the mask slipped. He looked tired but relieved. Welcome to the family, Elena. I looked at the ring, then at him. He didn't smile. I didn't smile. Let's get to work, I said. This wasn't a marriage. It was a declaration of war. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain, my pulse hammering in my throat like a trapped bird. The ballroom was a sea of black ties, glittering gowns, and fake laughter, but my eyes were locked on two specific people: Liam and Sarah. They stood near the champagne fountain, acting like royalty. Sarah was wearing a silver dress that looked too expensive for her salary. Liam had his hand on the small of her back, whispering something that made her throw her head back and giggle. It was a performance. They were performing happiness. Ready? 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 Ready, throw her head back and giggle. It was a performance. They were performing happiness. Ready? Julian's voice came from beside me, low and steady. I think I might throw up, I whispered, clutching my clutch until my knuckles turned white. You won't, he said, adjusting his onyx cufflinks. You look like a queen, Elena, act like one. He was right. The dress he had sent to the penthouse was a weapon. It was deep blood-red silk that clung to every curve before cascading to the floor in a pool of crimson. It was a statement. Go, Julian commanded softly. I'll follow your lead. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and stepped out from the shadows. The click of my heels on the marble floor seemed to echo. Heads turned, conversations died down. The red dress was a splash of violence in a room of monochrome safe choices. Liam saw me first. His smile froze instantly. Then it twisted into a familiar sneer. He nudged Sarah. Oh God, I heard Sarah laugh, though it sounded shrill. She actually came. I walked straight toward them. The crowd parted, sensing the tension radiating off me. Elena? Liam stepped forward, blocking my path. What the hell are you doing here? Enjoying the party, Liam, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. This is a private event, he hissed, looking around nervously to see if anyone important was watching. For employees and family only, you're neither. I just wanted to say hello, I said, tilting my head, enjoying the sweat beading on his forehead. You're embarrassing yourself, Sarah chimed in, stepping up beside him. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing at the dress. Did you spend your savings on a rental just to stalk us? That's sad, Al, even for you. Security. Liam waved a hand at a guard near the entrance. We have a crusher. Please escort this woman out. The guards started walking over. The humiliation burned my cheeks, but I held my ground. I wouldn't do that, I said softly. Get out, Elena, Liam spat. You're pathetic. We moved on. Deal with it. Is there a problem here? A deep voice cut through the noise like a blade. The crowd gasped. Julian stepped up beside me. He didn't look at Liam. He looked at the guard, who immediately stopped in his tracks and bowed his head. Mr. Sterling, the guard stammered. This woman, Julian interrupted, his voice projecting across the silent room, is my guest. Liam laughed nervously. Julian, don't worry, I've got this. It's just my crazy ex. She's obsessed with me. I'll have her thrown out. Julian finally turned his cold gaze to his brother. He slid his arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his side. His hand was warm, possessive, and heavy. You will do no such thing, Julian said comfortably. Unless you plan on throwing out the hostess. Hostess? Sarah whispered, her glass slipping from her fingers. It shattered on the floor, champagne splashing her cheap shoes. Allow me to introduce you, Julian said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. This is Elena Sterling, my wife. The silence was deafening. Liam's jaw literally dropped. He looked from Julian to me, his face draining of color. Wife, he stuttered. Since when? Since this morning, I said, resting my hand on Julian's chest. Surprise. That's impossible. A sharp voice rang out. Mrs. Sterling marched through the stunned crowd. She was a small woman with hair sprayed into a helmet of steel gray. She looked at me like I was a cockroach on her pristine carpet. Julian, she snapped. What is the meaning of this joke? No joke, Mother, Julian replied smoothly. Elena is the new Mrs. Sterling. You've always wanted me to settle down. You should be thrilled. Mrs. Sterling looked as if she had swallowed a whole lemon. Her eyes darted between Liam's shock and my triumphant smile. She was with Liam, Mrs. Sterling hissed. She is ... common. She is your superior, Julian corrected, his tone turning to absolute ice. And as the wife of the CEO, she outranks everyone in this circle, including you, Liam. Liam looked like he was going to be sick. I smiled at him. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized she had teeth. I believe you're standing on my dress, Liam, I said sweetly. Move. He scrambled back, nearly tripping over Sarah. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one running away. I was the one holding the leash. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the boss. The silence in the penthouse was louder than the gala music had been. It was a cold glass box floating above the city, and I felt like an intruder in a museum. Good morning, I ventured, walking into the kitchen. Julian didn't look up from his tablet. Coffee is in the pot. I wanted to thank you, I said, leaning against the marble island. For last night. You didn't have to humiliate them that badly. He finally looked at me, his eyes icy. I didn't do it for you, Elena. I did it to establish dominance. Don't mistake strategy for affection. Right? I muttered, stinging. Clause 4. Keep it professional. Exactly. He grabbed his briefcase and left without another word. For 3 nights, I barely saw him. We slept in separate wings. But the walls were thin enough that I heard him pacing at 3 a.m. I heard the sharp intake of breath from nightmares he refused to discuss. He wasn't just cold. He was haunted. On the 4th night, I walked into the kitchen at midnight. The private chef had left hours ago. Julian was sitting at the counter, staring at a blank wall, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. I opened the fridge. I'm making carbonara. You want some? He blinked, as if surprised I was real. The staff is gone. I have hands, Julian. I can cook. I moved around the kitchen, the clatter of pans the only sound. I plated 2 bowls and slid one across the island to him. He stared at it suspiciously. Is it edible? It's not poison if that's what you're asking. Eat. He took a bite. He paused, then took another. His shoulders dropped an inch. Why do you do it? I asked, sitting opposite him. Work yourself to death? You have the money. You have the power. Because if I stop, they win, he said, his voice rough. Liam? Liam is a parasite, Julian spat, the venom in his tone startling me. He thinks the world owes him happiness just because he exists. He breaks things, toys, companies, people, and expects me to glue them back together. He broke me, I whispered into my pasta. Julian looked at me. For the first time, the ice in his eyes thawed, revealing just exhaustion. He tries to break everything I build, Julian said softly. But he won't break this. The company? Us, he corrected. The arrangement. He wants to see you fail to prove he was right to leave you. I won't fail. I know. He pushed his empty bowl toward me. This was acceptable. High praise, I smirked. Go to bed, Elena. It was a dismissal, but it lacked the usual bite. As I walked back to my room, I realized I wasn't scared of the silence anymore. Julian wasn't a monster. He was just a lonely soldier in a war one had just joined. For the first time since the breakup, I locked my door and felt completely safe. The plaque on the door was polished brass, shiny enough to see my reflection. Elena Sterling, head of operations. I traced the letters with my finger, a shiver running down my spine. It wasn't just a title, it was a weapon. I walked into the office. It was corner-facing, 3 times the size of my old cubicle at my previous job. I sat in the ergonomic chair, spinning it once just because I could. The door flew open without a knock. You have got to be kidding me, Liam spat, slamming the door behind him so hard the glass walls rattled. I didn't flinch. I slowly turned my chair to face him, lacing my fingers together on the mahogany desk. Good morning to you too, Liam, I said, my voice calm. In the future, please knock. My schedule is quite full. Knock. Liam marched up to the desk, his face red. You think this is real? You think you're actually my boss? According to the org chart sent out by HR this morning, yes, I replied, gesturing to the screen. I believe you're currently a junior manager in logistics. That puts you 3 levels below me. You're unqualified, he shouted, leaning over the desk. You were a shift supervisor at a bookstore, Elena. You don't know the first thing about corporate operations. You're only here because you spread your legs for my brother. The insult hung in the air, ugly and sharp. A month ago, that would have made me cry. Today, it just made me bored. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a heavy stack of manila folders. I dropped them onto the desk with a loud thud. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. What is this? Liam asked, blinking. These, I said, tapping the stack, are your quarterly reports, the ones that were due 3 weeks ago. The ones Julian told me you forgot because you were too busy networking. Liam paled. I was getting to those. You were getting to them while you were cheating on me, I corrected. I opened the top folder. This data is a mess, Liam. It's lazy. It's sloppy. And it's costing the company money. I can explain. I don't want an excuse, I cut him off. I want them fixed, all of them, by 5 p.m. today. That's impossible, he sputtered. There are 6 files here. It's lunch time. Then I suggest you skip lunch, I said, turning back to my computer. If they are on my desk by 5, I'm writing you up for incompetence. 3 write-ups and you're fired. Just like any other employee. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He realized then that being a Sterling by blood didn't protect him anymore. He grabbed the files and stormed out. Unbelievable. He yelled at the hallway. I waited 5 minutes, then followed him out to check on the floor. I heard his voice before I saw him. He was standing near the copy machine, towering over a young woman with glasses. Are you stupid? Liam was shouting, pointing a finger in her face. I said, collated, staple them. Why is everyone in this building incompetent? The girl, Chloe, was trembling, clutching a ream of paper to her chest. I'm sorry, Liam, It's Mr. Sterling to you. I want them fixed, Arlington fixed. All of them. Is there a problem here? I asked, stepping into the hallway. The floor went silent. Everyone watched. Liam spun around, his eyes wide. Just training the intern, he muttered, adjusting his tie. It didn't look like training, I said, walking up to Chloe. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched, then looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Are you okay? I messed up the copies, she whispered. She's useless, Liam sneered. Can't even work a Xerox. Liam, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Go to your desk. Finish your reports. If I hear you raise your voice at Chloe or anyone else again, you'll be escorted out by security. Do you understand? He looked around. The other employees were watching, waiting. He was humiliated. Fine, he grunted, turning on his heel and marching away. I turned back to Chloe. She looked at me like I was Wonder Woman. Thank you, she breathed. Nobody ever stands up to him. He's the brother. Not anymore, I smiled, squeezing her shoulder. He's just an employee. And you're doing a great job, Chloe. Take your time. She smiled back, a genuine relieved smile. I walked back to my office, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with anger. Julian had given me a sword, but I realized I didn't have to use it just to kill. I could use it to protect. Fixing this company was going to be fun. Error 404. File not found. The notification blinked on my screen like a red warning light. I clicked refresh, nothing. I clicked undo, nothing. The folder labeled Project Titan the merger data worth $3 billion was empty, 0 bytes. No, I whispered, my hand shaking as I gripped the mouse. No, no, no. I checked the backup drive. Corrupted. The blood drained from my face. The board meeting was tomorrow morning. Without these files, the merger would fail. Julian's leadership would be called into question, the stock would tank, and our contract, my safety net, would be void. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and looked through the glass walls of my office. That's when I saw them. Liam was standing near the elevators, looking unusually pleased with himself. Next to him was a man I recognized from the company website, Marcus. He was the oldest member of the board, a man with silver hair and a reputation for hating Julian's radical leadership. Marcus leaned in close to Liam, whispering something. Liam laughed a cruel, jagged sound and clapped Marcus on the shoulder. They looked like conspirators celebrating a kill. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The air in the office felt suddenly thin. I pushed past my assistant, ignoring her question, and bolted for the executive washroom at the end of the hall. I slammed the door, locking it with trembling fingers, and leaned over the marble sink, gasping for air. They did this. They deleted it. The door handle jiggled, then a key turned in the lock. I froze, wiping my eyes frantically. Julian stepped in, relocking the door behind him. He looked impeccable as always, but his eyes were sharp. "You've been in here for 20 minutes, he said, his voice echoing off the tile. "Kenji says you look like you'd seen a ghost. Talk to me." "It's gone," I choked out. "The Titan files, everything. It's all gone." Julian went perfectly still. "Deleted?" "Wiped," I said, tears spilling over. "The backups are corrupted." "I locked my computer, Julian, I swear." "I didn't." "Helena," he interrupted, stepping closer. He didn't look angry. He looked intense. "Look at me." I looked up, trembling. "Did you do it?" he asked. "No." "Good," he said, the tension in his shoulders dropping instantly. "Then we fix it?" "Fix it?" I let out a hysterical laugh. It was 3 months of work. "We have 12 hours. "Then we have 12 hours, he said calmly, loosening his silk tie. "If you didn't do it, someone else did. And I am not going to let them win. But, do you trust me?" I looked at him. There was no doubt in his eyes. He believed me. He didn't ask for proof. He just took my word. "Yes," I whispered. "Then wipe your face," he commanded gently. "We have a long night ahead." We turned his office into a war room. We ordered 4 pots of coffee and shut down the network access to everyone else. For the next 10 hours, it was just the hum of the servers and the frantic clicking of keyboards. "Read me the Q3 tax projections from the hard copy," Julian ordered, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. "Revenue up 12%, overhead down by 4%. I read, scanning the paper I had luckily. The Sterling dining room was a cavern of mahogany and crystal, designed to make everyone inside it feel small. But tonight, the suffocation I felt had nothing to do with the architecture. "Mom?" I froze in the doorway, my hand tightening on Julian's arm. Sitting next to Mrs. Sterling, looking entirely out of place in her department store cardigan, was my mother, Linda. She held a crystal goblet awkwardly, looking between Sarah and Liam with a warm, confused smile. "Elena," Mom stood up, her face lighting up with relief. Finally, Mrs. Sterling was kind enough to send a car for me. "We have been waiting." "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice tight. "To talk sense into you," Mom said, her smile fading into a frown. "Sit down. We need to stop this charade." I looked at Julian. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning the room like a security camera. He pulled out my chair without a word. "Mother?" Julian nodded to Mrs. Sterling. "Linda." "Let's eat," Mrs. Sterling commanded, ringing a tiny silver bell. Servants materialized, placing plates of roast duck in front of us. The smell made my stomach turn. Across the table, Sarah sat next to Liam. She looked radiant, her hand resting conspicuously on his knee. "I was just telling Linda how much we miss you at Sunday brunch," Sarah said sweetly, looking at me. "It's been so quiet without you, Elle." "Don't call me that," I snapped. "Elena," Mom scolded, slamming her fork down. "Don't be rude. Sarah has been trying to reach out to you for weeks." "She's your best friend." "She slept with my boyfriend, Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "On our anniversary." "People make mistakes," Mom sighed, waving her hand dismissively. "Liam explained everything to me. They fell in love. You can't punish them forever for following their hearts. And marrying his brother out of spite? It's childish, Elena. It's not you." I felt the blood drain from my face. My own mother. Sarah had gotten to her. "It's not spite," I whispered. "It's my life." "It's a temper tantrum," Liam interjected, smirking as he swirled his wine. "She's just trying to make me jealous, Linda. She knows she can't handle a man like Julian. She'd be back to begging for me in a month." "I just want us to be a family again," Sarah added, wiping a fake tear. "I miss my best friend." "See?" Mom looked at me with disappointment. "She's hurting, Elena. Be the bigger person. Apologize and come home." I looked around the table. Mrs. Sterling looked bored. Liam looked triumphant. Sarah looked like a saint. And my mother, she looked at me like I was the villain. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to scream, but my throat closed up. I felt small. I felt alone. Bam! The table shook. Silverware clattered against china. Julian had slammed his open palm onto the mahogany surface. The sound was like a gunshot. "Enough," he growled. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Julian," Mrs. Sterling gasped. I have sat here, Julian said, his voice dangerously low, and watched you all peck at her like vultures, but you... He turned his burning gaze on my mother. You should be ashamed. I beg your pardon? Mom blinked, shocked. She's your daughter, Julian said, his voice rising, vibrating with controlled rage. She's the most intelligent, hardworking, and resilient woman I have ever met. She runs my company better than I do. She carries herself with more dignity in one finger than Liam has in his entire body. The room was dead silent. Liam shrank back in his chair. Sarah's mouth hung open. She didn't marry me out of spite, Julian continued, looking directly at my mother. She married me because she outgrew them. And if you can't see that, Linda, then you don't deserve a seat at her table or mine. He reached under the table and found my hand. His grip was tight, desperate, and warm. Julian... I breathed, staring at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was glaring at them, a protective wall of ice and fire. But his thumb was stroking the back of my hand, a gentle rhythmic comfort. Dinner is over, Julian declared, standing up and pulling me with him. We're leaving. You can't just walk out. Mrs. Sterling shrieked. Watch me, he said. As he led me out of the suffocating room, his hand never left mine. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from something else. He had defended me, not for the contract, not for the board, for me. I looked at his broad shoulders, his determined stride, and I realized with a terrifying clarity, nothing about this felt fake anymore. I was falling in love with my husband. I have an announcement, Sarah chirped, tapping her spoon against her champagne flute. We were gathered in the Sterling family sunroom for what Mrs. Sterling called a peace summit. I sat next to Julian, stiff and uncomfortable. Across the table, Sarah placed a manicured hand over her flat stomach. She looked at Liam with misty, theatrical eyes. We're having a baby, she whispered, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. The silence lasted exactly 1 second before Mrs. Sterling shrieked. A baby, a Sterling heir. She rushed over, nearly knocking over her chair to embrace Sarah. Oh, finally, a legacy. Liam leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms behind his head. He looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips that made my blood run cold. He didn't look like a father-to-be. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. Looks like I'm the favorite again, doesn't it, Elena? He said smoothly, raising his glass. You might have the title in the office, but I have the bloodline. You can't fire the father of the future CEO. I felt sick, physically sick. A baby changed everything. I could fight Liam on spreadsheets, profit margins, and board votes, but I couldn't fight a pregnancy. It felt dirty. It felt cruel. I need air, I muttered, standing up abruptly. Jealousy looks ugly on you, dear, Mrs. Sterling called out, not even looking at me as she patted Sarah's hand. Sarah, you must move into the main house. You need rest. I walked out to the stone terrace, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. The wind was cold, but my face was burning. I felt Julian step up beside me a moment later. I can't do this, I whispered, staring at the manicured gardens. I can't fight a child, Julian. If she's pregnant, she wins. The board will never oust him now. It's over. Is it? Julian asked, his voice strangely calm. Yes, it's a baby. It makes him untouchable. Trust me, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Look at Kenji. I turned. Kenji was walking toward us across the lawn, holding a tablet. He didn't look happy or sad. He looked bored. Report, Julian commanded. I tracked Miss Sarah's expenses for the last 48 hours, Kenji said, tapping the screen. Yesterday lunch at the Ivy, 2 orders of raw tuna tartare, 3 glasses of Pinot Noir. I blinked. Raw fish? And wine? And this morning, Kenji continued, scrolling down. A transaction at the pharmacy near her apartment. Not for prenatal vitamins, for a box of tampons. My mouth fell open. She's not pregnant. She's desperate, Julian said, his eyes dark. She knows Liam is losing his grip on the company. She needs a tether. A fake baby buys her 9 months of immunity and my mother's protection. It's a trap, I realized, the sickness in my stomach replacing with a cold, hard Project Ether. I tapped the label carefully and stuck it onto the thick red confidential folder. I placed it dead center on my mahogany desk, angled just enough to be tempting. Are you sure this will work? Chloe whispered, leaning against my doorframe while pretending to organize files. He's desperate, Chloe, I said, grabbing my purse. Desperate men don't look for traps, they just see cheese. I walked out for lunch, leaving my office door unlocked. Just slightly. An hour later, I returned. The folder was exactly where I left it, but the corner was bent. Chloe walked by, dropping a stack of mail on my desk. 12:15 p.m., she murmured without moving her lips. He was in here for 4 minutes. He took photos of every page. Did anyone see him? Just me, she winked. And I'm invisible to him. Perfect, I breathed. The next morning, the boardroom was packed. The air conditioner hummed, but Liam was sweating. He stood at the head of the table, clicking a remote. Gentlemen, Liam announced, his voice booming with unearned confidence. I present to you the future of Sterling Court Project Ether. The screen lit up with the charts I'd fabricated the night before. They were impressive. They were bold. And they were completely, utterly impossible. This initiative, Liam bragged, pointing to a rising red line, utilizes a new algorithmic approach to our logistics supply chain. It will cut costs by 40% in Q4, Marcus sat forward, his eyes gleaming. 40%? That's revolutionary, Liam. It is, Liam nodded, puffing out his chest. I've been developing this strategy for months. While others, he shot a nasty look at me, were focusing on minor administrative tasks, I was focusing on growth. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't object. I didn't question the data. I just watched. Impressive, Julian said from the head of the table. His face was a mask of indifference, but when his eyes met mine, I saw the sparkle. Thank you, brother, Liam smirked. I think it's time we put some real leadership behind this merger. We will put it to a vote next week, Marcus declared. Excellent work, son. Liam sat down looking like a king. He had swallowed the bait, the hook, and the line. That night, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted. It wasn't the usual cold silence. It was electric. Julian poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey. To Project Ether, he toasted, a rare, genuine grin breaking his stoic expression. To the ashes, I corrected, clinking my glass against his. He didn't even check the math, Julian. The projection relies on a tax loophole that hasn't existed since 1998. Talvin projection relies on a tax loophole that hasn't existed since 1998. He's lazy. Julian stepped closer, loosening his tie. But you are dangerous. Is that a compliment? The highest one I can give. He was standing close. Too close. I could smell the sandalwood of his cologne and the heat radiating off him. The adrenaline of the victory was mixing with something else, something heavier. He reached out, his fingers grazing my jawline. His touch sent a shockwave through me. Elena, he whispered, his gaze dropping to my lips. My breath hitched. I wanted him to close the gap. I wanted to forget the plan and just be his wife. But then the contract flashed in my mind. Clause 12, termination after 1 year. If I let this happen and he leaves me when the year is up, it will destroy me. I pulled back sharply, setting my glass on the counter with a loud clink. I have to check the emails, I stammered, backing away. To make sure the trap is set for the meeting. Julian's hand fell to his side. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flicker of hurt. Right, he said, his voice stiffening. Business first. Good night, Elena. I walked to my room, my heart pounding against my ribs, wishing I was brave enough to stay. The projector fan whirred in the silence of the boardroom, a sound that seemed to amplify the pounding in my ears. The long oak table was fully occupied. 12 men and women the board of directors sat with their hands folded, watching the screen. At the head of the room, Liam stood with a laser pointer, looking more confident than I had ever seen him. As you can see, gentlemen, Liam said, his voice booming with rehearsed authority. Project Ether isn't just a logistics update. It is a complete restructuring of our supply chain. The projected savings are in the millions within the first quarter. Marcus, sitting to my right, nodded approvingly, tapping his pen on his notepad. Finally, Marcus muttered, loud enough for Julian to hear, some actual vision in this company. Julian sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at Liam. And this data, one of the board members, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, asked, adjusting her glasses. You vetted this yourself, Liam? Personally, Liam lied without a stutter. I spent the last 2 weeks crunching these numbers. It's my proprietary algorithm. I exchanged a glance with Julian. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Are you finished, Liam? Julian asked, his voice cutting through the room's murmur. I am, Liam smirked, buttoning his jacket. Unless, of course, the current administration has any objections to making money? Actually, I said, standing up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I have a question. Liam rolled his eyes. Make it quick, Elena. We have real business to discuss. You said you calculated the logistics coefficient yourself, I said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. Can you explain why you used the 1998 tax code for the import tariffs? Liam blinked. The what? The data and Project Ether, I continued, my voice steady. It relies on a tax loophole that was closed 20 years ago. If we implemented this plan, the IRS would shut us down in a week. That's a minor oversight, Liam stammered, sweat instantly breaking out on his forehead. I can adjust it. You can't adjust it, I said, stopping directly in front of him. Because the project doesn't exist, Liam, I made it up. The room went deadly silent. Marcus stopped tapping his pen. Excuse me? Mrs. Higgins asked sharply. I created a dummy folder on my computer labeled confidential, I explained, turning to the board. I filled it with nonsensical data and impossible projections to see if anyone would steal it. And someone did. She's lying, Liam shouted, his face turning purple. She's jealous. She's trying to sabotage me because I dumped her. Am I? I pulled a remote from my pocket and pointed it at the screen. The image of the graphs disappeared, replaced by grainy black and white footage. It showed my office. The timestamp read 12:15 p.m. 2 days ago. The door opened and Liam walked in. He looked around nervously, then pulled out his phone and started photographing the documents on my desk. That's... Liam's voice failed him. That is corporate espionage, Julian stated, finally standing up. Stealing proprietary data, lying to the board. Attempting to defraud the company. It was a mistake. Liam yelled, looking at Marcus for help. Marcus, tell them. You said we needed leverage. I said nothing of the sort, Marcus snapped, closing his folder. Do not drag me into your incompetence, boy. Oh, but you are involved, I said, pulling a stack of papers from my portfolio. I have the email logs from the day the merger files were deleted. They weren't deleted from the server, Marcus. They were accessed remotely, from your IP address. I slid the papers down the table. Marcus went pale. This is absurd, Marcus hissed, standing up. I am a senior member of this board. You were? Julian corrected coldly. Security is waiting for you in the lobby. The room erupted into whispers. Liam looked around wildly, his eyes landing on his mother, who was sitting in the corner, clutching her pearls. Mom, Liam pleaded. Do something, tell them. I'm doing this for the family, for the baby. Ah, the baby, I said softly. The final piece of the puzzle. I picked up a second folder, a blue one this time. What is that? Mrs. Sterling whispered, her eyes wide. Sarah's medical records, I said, holding them up. Rather the lack of them. There is no OBGYN on file. There are no ultrasounds. But there are receipts from the pharmacy for tampons purchased yesterday. No, Mrs. Sterling breathed, standing up. She said ... she swore. She isn't pregnant, Mrs. Sterling, I said, looking Liam dead in the eye. She faked it. Just like Liam faked this project. Just like they faked their loyalty to you. Liam slumped against the wall, defeated. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realized he had played a game he didn't understand and lost everything. Get out, Julian said. It wasn't a shout. It was a final judgment. You're fired, Liam, and if I see you in this building again, I'll have you arrested for theft. Liam looked at me one last time. He didn't see the girl he cheated on. He saw the woman who just ended him. He turned and walked out the door, passing Sarah, who was waiting in the hall with balloons. I heard her scream of confusion as the door clicked shut. I looked at Julian. He gave me a small, rare smile. It was over. We had won. The scream echoed off the polished marble walls of the Sterling Corp lobby, piercing the usual hum of business like a siren. You are a loser, Liam. A complete, utter loser. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, looking down. It was the kind of spectacle I had dreamed of for months, yet now that it was happening, it felt distant, like watching a play from the cheap seats. Below, security guards were struggling to keep a perimeter around the two people who had destroyed my life. I'm the loser? Liam roared, his face blotchy and tear-streaked. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. You lied about a baby. You trapped me. Do you know how insane that is? I was trying to save us. Sarah shrieked, swinging her designer bag at him. Because you were drowning. You have no job, no money, and no future without that family. I was your insurance policy. You were a leech. Liam grabbed her arm, but a security guard shoved him back. I should have never left Elena. She was loyal. She was real. You're just a cheap knockoff. The crowd of employees gasped. Phones were out, recording every second. Don't you dare mention her. Sarah spat, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. She's a witch. She manipulated everything. She won. Liam yelled, his voice cracking. She won and we have nothing. Get away from me, Sarah. We're done. I never want to see your face again. Fine. Sarah screamed, throwing her engagement ring, a modest stone compared to mine, at his chest. Go rot in your mother's guest house, you pathetic man-child. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone cold. I waited for the rush of satisfaction. I waited for the joy of seeing them broken, humiliated, and tearing each other apart. But it didn't come. Instead, I just felt a hollow, quiet indifference. They weren't monsters anymore. They were just two sad, selfish people who had played a game they weren't smart enough to win. I turned away from the railing and walked back toward the private elevator. The show was over. The penthouse was silent. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the living room that I had never really made my home. My suitcase lay open on the bed. Clause 14, I whispered to the empty room. Upon the successful neutralization of the threat to the CEO's position, the marriage contract may be dissolved by either party. I folded the red dress, the one Julian had bought me for the gala. I hesitated, then placed it in the bag. The war was won. Liam was fired. Sarah was exposed. The board was secure. Julian didn't need a wife anymore. He needed a CEO, and he was back in control. I walked to the vanity. The divorce papers were already sitting there. I had printed them myself an hour ago. Julian was efficient. He wouldn't want to drag this out. I uncapped the pen. My hand didn't shake, but my chest ached with a sharp physical pain I hadn't expected. It was just business, I told my reflection. You knew the rules, Elena, but the rules had changed. Somewhere between the late-night strategy sessions and the hand-holding under the dinner table, I had broken the most important rule of all. I had fallen in love with the client. I signed my name at the bottom, Elena Sterling. I slipped the heavy diamond ring off my finger. It left a pale band of skin behind, a ghost of the last few months. I placed the ring on top of the papers. I grabbed a sticky note and wrote 3 words. You won. Congratulations. I stuck it to the file. Goodbye, Julian, I whispered. I zipped up the suitcase. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I grabbed the handle and walked out, leaving the key card on the entry table. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the door slid shut, cutting off my view of the life I could have had, I felt tears prick my eyes. I had gotten my revenge, but standing there in the descending metal box, I realized I had lost the only thing that actually mattered. It was raining. Of course, it was raining. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I stood on the curb outside the penthouse building, shivering in my trench coat, watching the taxis blur past like yellow streaks of indifference. It felt exactly like the night I walked out on Liam cold wet and holding a bag full of a life that didn't fit anymore. Taxi, I yelled, waving my hand. The cab didn't stop. It splashed a wave of dirty gutter water onto my boots. I let out a shaky breath, looking down at the pavement. This was it, the grand exit. I had won the war, destroyed the enemy, and secured the kingdom. So why did I feel like I was the one who had lost everything? Screech. A black car swerved to the curb, tires crying out against the wet asphalt. I recognized the aggressive grille immediately. The Maybach, the driver's door flew open. Julian stepped out. He wasn't waiting for a chauffeur. He wasn't wearing an umbrella. He wasn't even wearing a coat over his suit. He looked frantic. Elena, he shouted over the roll of thunder. Stop. Go back inside, Julian. I yelled back, clutching my suitcase handle so hard my fingers ached. The contract is done. You won. You don't have to pretend anymore. Is that what you think this was? He marched toward me, the rain instantly plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He looked wild. He looked nothing like the composed, icy CEO I had married. He held up the manila folder I had left on the vanity. The divorce papers? You signed these, he said, his chest heaving as he stopped a foot away from me. Yes, because the job is finished, I cried, tears mixing with the rain on my cheeks. Leon is gone. The board is yours. You don't need a fake wife to secure your stock options anymore. You're free. You're right, he said, his voice dropping to a rough, desperate growl. I don't need a fake wife. He took the thick stack of legal papers in both hands. Then, with a violent, deliberate rip, he tore them down the middle. My mouth fell open. What are you doing? That's a legal document. He ripped them again. And again. He let the confetti of legal jargon and my signature fall into the muddy puddle at our feet. I am voiding the termination clause, he said, stepping closer until he was looming over me, shielding me from the wind. I don't accept your resignation, Elena, because I don't want a partner. I fired my last partner. Then what do you want? I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. I want the woman who walked into my office and demanded a job when she had nothing, he said, grabbing my shoulders. I want the woman who stared down a room full of vultures at the gala and didn't blink. I want the woman who saved my company at 4 a.m. while I was ready to give up. Julian ... I was cold because I was terrified, he confessed, staring into my eyes with an intensity that burned hotter than the cold rain. I thought everyone wanted something from me, money, status, a legacy, but you ... you just wanted justice. And in the process, you gave me a reason to come home. I thought you just saw me as an asset, I choked out. I thought I was just a line item in your budget. You are the only asset I can't afford to lose, he said firmly, wiping a wet strand of hair from my face. I love you, Elena, not the contract. Not the deal, you. The world seemed to stop. The rain, the traffic, the noise, it all faded into background static. Say it again, I breathed. I love you. I dropped my suitcase. It hit the ground with a splash. I didn't care about the clothes. I didn't care about the ruined shoes. I threw my arms around his neck, pulling him down. I love you too, you idiot, I sobbed. He kissed me. It wasn't a polite public relations kiss for the cameras. It was hungry, desperate, and real. It tasted like rain and expensive scotch and forever. The next morning, the sun was blinding. The elevator doors at Sterling Corp dinged open. The receptionist, Jessica, looked up, startled. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Sterling? Good morning, Jessica, Julian said. His voice was light, his hand firmly interlaced with mine. We walked down the hallway. Heads turned, whispers followed us. But this time, I wasn't walking 3 steps behind him. I was walking beside him. We passed Liam's old office. It was empty, a for rent sign already taped to the glass walls. I didn't even slow down to look. Ready for the budget meeting? Julian asked, pausing at the door to my office, the one with head of operations still shining on the plaque. I think you mean our budget meeting, I corrected, reaching up to straighten his tie. He smiled, a real, dazzling smile that reached his eyes and stayed there. After you, boss. I walked into my office, the city skyline sprawling before me. I had come here for revenge. I had stayed for survival. But as I sat down and looked back at my husband, who was watching me with pure, unadulterated adoration, I knew the truth. I was the CEO's wife. I was the boss. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by who I was fighting. I was defined by who I loved. And that was the best victory of all.